Welcome back to the cozy reading of The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. If you've ever seen a dragon in a pinch, you'll realize this was only poetical exaggeration applied to any hobbit, even to old Took's great uncle Burglar, who was so huge but he could ride a horse. He charged the ranks of a goblin of Mount Grom in the Battle of Greenfields and knocked their king, Gallifilbol's head clean off with a wooden club. It sailed 100 yards through the air and went down a rabbit hole. And in this way, the battle was won and the game of golf invented at the same time. In the meanwhile, Bulror's gentler descendants was reviving in the drawing room. After a while, and a drink, he crept nervously to the door of the parlor. This is what he heard. Gawain speaking. Humph. Will he do you think? It is all very well for Gandalf to talk about this hobbit being fierce, but one shriek like that in a moment of excitement would be enough to wake the dragon and all his relatives and kill the lot of us. I think it sounded more like a fright than excitement. In fact, if it had not been for that sign on the door, I should have been sure we had come to the wrong house. As soon as I clapped eyes on the little fellow bobbing and puffing on the mat, I had my doubts. He looks more like a grocer than a burglar. And Mr. Baggins turned the handle and went in. The Took side had won. He suddenly felt he would go without bed and breakfast to be thought fierce. As for little fellow bobbing on the mat, it almost made him really fierce. Many a time afterwards, the Baggins part regretted what he did now, and he said to himself, "Bilbo, you fool. You were a fool. You walked right in and put your foot in it." "Pardon me," he said, "if I had overheard words that you were saying. I don't pretend to understand what you're talking about or a reference to burglars, but I think I'm right in believing that you think I am no good. I will show you. I have no signs on my door. It was painted a week ago, and I'm quite sure you've come to the wrong house. As soon as I saw your funny faces on the doorstep, I had my doubts. But treat it as the right one. Tell me what you want done, and I will try it. If I have to walk from here to the east of the east and fight the wild werewolves in the last desert. I had a great-great-grand-uncle once Bulbo took and yes, but that was a long time ago," said Gawain. "I was talking about you, and I'm sure you're there as a mark on this door, the usual one on the trader used to be. Burglar wants a good job, plenty of excitement, and reasonable reward. That's how it's usually read. You can say expert treasure hunter instead of burglar if you'd like. Some of them do. It's all the same to us. Gandalf told us that there was a man on the sort in this parts looking for a job at once, and that he had arranged for a meeting here this Wednesday at tea time." "Of course there's a mark," said Gandalf. "I put it there myself, for very good reasons. You asked me to find the 14th man for your expedition, and I chose Mr. Baggins. Just let anyone say I chose the wrong man or the wrong house, and you can stop at 13 and have all the bad luck you'd like, or go back to digging coal." He scowled so angrily at Gawain that the dwarf huddled back in his chair, and when Bilbo tried to open his mouth to ask a question, he turned and frowned at him and stuck out his bursy eyebrows till Bilbo shut his mouth tight with a snap. "That's right," said Gandalf. "Let's have no more argument. I have chosen Mr. Baggins, and that ought to be enough for all of you. If I say he's a burglar he is, or will be when the time comes. There's a lot more in him than you guess, and a deal more when he had the idea of himself. You may possibly all live to thank me yet. Now, Bilbo, my boy, fetch the lamp, and let's have a little light on this." On the table, in the light of a big lamp with a red shape. He spread a piece of parchment, rather like a map. "This was made for Thror, your grandfather Thorin," he said in an answer to the dwarves' excited questions. "It is the plan of the mountain." "I don't see that this will help us much," said Thorin disappointedly after a glance. "I remember the mountain well enough, and the lands about it. And I know where Mirkwood is, and the withered heath where the great dragons bred." "There's a dragon marked in red on the mountain," said Balin, "but it will be easy enough to find him without that, even if ever we arrive there." "There's no point that you haven't noticed," said the wizard, "and that is the secret entrance. You see that ruin on the west side, and the hand pointing to it from the other ruins? That marks a hidden passage to the lower halls." "It may have been secret once," said Thorin, "but how do we know that this secret any longer? Old Smaug has lived there long enough now to find anything there is to know about those caves. He may, but he can't have used it for years and years." "Why not?" "Because it's too small. 5 feet high, the door, and 3 may walk up abreast," said the runes. "But Smaug could not creep into a hole that size. Not even when he was a young dragon, certainly not after devouring so many of the dwarves and the men of Dale." "It seems a great big hole to me," squeaked Bilbo, who had no experience of dragons and only of hobbit holes. He was getting excited and interested again, so that he forgot to keep his mouth shut. He loved maps, and in this hall there hung a large one of the country round, with all his favorite walks marked on its red ink. How could such a log door be kept secret from everybody's outside, apart from the dragon? He asked. He was only a little hobbit, you must remember. "In lots of ways," said Gandalf. "But in what way this one has been hidden, we don't know without going to see. From what it says on the map, I should guess that there is a closed door which has been made to look exactly like the side of the mountain. That is usually the dwarves' method. I think that's right, isn't it?" "Quite right," said Thorin. "Also, when on Gandalf, I forgot to mention that with the map went a key. A small, curious key. Here it is," he said, and handed to Thorin a key with a long barrel and intricate wards made of silver. "Keep it safe." "Indeed I will," said Thorin, and he fastened it upon a fine chain that hung about his neck and under his jacket. Now things began to look more hopeful. This news altered them much for the better. So far, we've had no clear idea of what to do. We thought of going east, as quiet and careful as we could, as far as the long lake. After that, the trouble would begin. "A long time before that, if I knew anything about the roads east," interrupted Gandalf. "We might go there, along the river running," went on Thorin, taking no notice. "And so the ruins of Dale, the old town in the valley there, under the shadow of the mountain. But we none of us liked the idea of the front gate. The river runs right out through it, the great cliff at the side of the mountain. Out comes the dragon, too, far too often unless he has changed his habits." "That would be no good," said the wizard, "not without a mighty warrior, even a hero. I tried to find one, but warriors are busy fighting in distant lands, and in this neighborhood heroes are scarce, or simply not to be found. Swords in these parts are mostly blunt and axes used for trees, and shields as cradles or dish covers, and dragons are comfortably far off, and therefore legendary. This is why I settled on burglary, especially when I remembered the existence of a side door. And here is our little Bilbo Baggins, the burglar, the chosen and selected burglar. So now let's go on and make some plans." "Very well, then," said Thorin. Supposing the burglar expert gives us some ideas or suggestions, he turned with mock politeness to Bilbo. First, I should like to know a bit more about things, said he, feeling all confused and a bit shaky inside, but so far still tookishly determined to go on with things. I mean, about the gold and the dragon and all that, and how it got there and who it belongs to, and so on and further. Bless me, said Thorin, haven't you got a map? Didn't you hear our song? And haven't we been talking about all this for hours? All the same, I should like it all plain and clear. Putting on his business manner, doing his best to appear wise and prudent and professional, and live up to Gandalf's recommendation. Also, I should like to know about risks, out-of-pocket expenses, time required, and remuneration, and so forth. By which he meant, what am I going to get out of this? And am I going to come back alive? Oh, very well, said Thorin. Long ago, in my grandfather Thor's time, our family was driven out of the far north and came back with all their wealth and their tools to this mountain on the map. It had been discovered by my far ancestor Thrain the Old, but now they mined and they tunneled and they made huger halls and greater workshops. And in addition, I believe they found a good deal of gold and a great many jewels too. Anyway, they grew immensely rich and famous, and my grandfather was king under the mountain again, and treated with great reverence by the mortal men who lived to the south, and were gradually spreading up the running river as far as the valley overshadowed by the mountain. They built the merry town of Dale there in those days. Kings used to send for smiths and reward even the least skillful most richly. Fathers would beg us to take their sons as apprentices and pay us handsomely, especially in food supplies, which never bothered to grow or find for ourselves. Altogether, those were good days for us, and the poorest of us had money to spend and to lend and leisure to make beautiful things just for the fun of it, not to speak of the most marvelous and magical toys, the like of which is not to be found in the world nowadays. So my grandfather's halls became full of armor and jewels and carvings and cups, and the towy market of Dale was the wonder of the north. Undoubtedly that was what brought the dragon. Dragons steal gold and jewels, from men and elves and dwarves, wherever they can find them, and they guard their plunder as long as they live, and never enjoy a brass ring of it. Indeed, they hardly know a good bit of work from a bad, though they usually have a good notion of the current market value, and they can't make things for themselves, not even mend a little loose scale of their armor. There were lots of dragons in the north those days, and gold was probably getting scarce up there, when the dwarves flying south were getting killed, and all the general waste and destruction that dragons make going from bad to worse. There was once most specially greedy, strong, and wicked worm called Smaug. One day he flew up into the air and came south. The first we heard of it was a noise like a hurricane coming from the north, and the pine trees on the mountain creaking and cracking in the wind. Some of the dwarves who happened to be outside, I was one lucky, a fine adventurous lad in those days, always wandering about, and it saved my life that day. Well, from a good way off, we saw the dragon settle on our mountain in a spout or flame. Then he came down the slopes, and when he reached the woods, they all went up in fire. By that time, all the bells were ringing in Dale, and the warriors were arming. The dwarves rushed out of their great gate, but there was the dragon waiting for them. None escaped that day. The river rushed up in steam, and the fog fell on Dale. And in the fog, the dragon came on and destroyed most of the warriors. The usual unhappy story. It was only too common in those days. Then he went back and crept in through the front gate and routed out all the halls and lanes and tunnels, alleys, cellars, mansions, and passages. After that, there were no dwarves left inside. He took all their wealth for himself, probably for that is the dragon's way. He has piled it up in a great heap far inside and sleeps on it for a bed. Later he used to crawl out of the great gate and come by night to Dale, carry away people, especially maidens, to eat, until Dale was ruined and the people dead or gone. What goes on now, I don't know for certain, but I don't suppose any of the lives nearer to the mountain than the fog edge of the long lake nowadays. The few of us that were well outside sat and wept in hiding and cursed Smaug. They were unexpectedly joined by my father and my grandfather with singed beards. They looked very grim, but they said very little. When I asked how they got away, they told me to hold my tongue and said that one day in proper time I should know. And that we went away, and we have had to earn our livings as best as we could up and down the lands, often enough sinking as low as a blacksmith work or even coal mining. But we have never forgotten our stolen treasure, and even now, when I will allow we have a good bit of laid by and not so badly off, here Thorin stroked the gold chain around his neck, we still mean to get it back, and to bring our curses home to Smaug, if we can. I've often wondered about my father's and grandfather's escape. I see now that they must have had a private side door, which only they knew about, but apparently they made a map, and I should like to know how Gandalf got a hold of it, and why it did not come to me, the rightful heir. I did not get a hold of it. I was given it, and the wizard, your grandfather Thror, was killed, you remember, in the mines of Moria by Osdog the Goblin. Curse his name, yes, said Thorin. And Thrain, your father, went away on the 21st of April, 100 years ago last Thursday, and has never been seen by you since. True, true, said Thorin. Well, your father gave me this to give to you, and if I have chosen my own time and the way of handling it over, you can hardly blame me, considering the trouble I had to find you. Your father could not remember his own name when he gave me this paper, and he never told me yours, so the whole I can think I ought to be praised and thanked. Here it is, said he handed the map to Thorin. I don't understand, said Thorin, and Bilbo felt he would have liked to say the same. The explanation did not seem to explain. Your grandfather, said the wizard slowly and grimly, gave the map to his son for safety before he went to the mines of Moria. Your father went away to try his luck with the map after your grandfather was killed, and lots of adventures of an unpleasant sort he had. But he never got near the mountain. How could he go? I don't know, but I found him a prisoner in the dragon's dungeons of the necromancer. Whatever were you doing there? Said Thorin with a shudder, and all the dwarves shivered. Never you mind, I was finding things out as usual, in a nasty dangerous business. Even I, Gandalf, only just escaped. I tried to save your father, but it was too late. He was witless and wandering, and he had forgotten almost everything except the map and the key. We have long ago paid the goblins of Moria, said Thorin. We must have thought to the necromancer. Don't be absurd. He's an enemy far beyond the powers of all the dwarves put together. If they could all be collected again from the four corners of the world. The one thing your father wished was for his son to read the map and use the key. The dragon and the mountain are more than big enough tasks for you. Hear, hear, said Bilbo, and accidentally said it out loud. Hear what? They all said, turning suddenly towards him, and he was flustered. Then he answered, "Hear what I've got to say." "What's that?" they asked. "Well, I should say that you ought to go east and have a look around. After all, there is the side door, and dragons must sleep sometimes, I suppose. If you sit on the doorstep long enough, I dare say you will think of something. And well, don't you know, I think we've talked a long enough time for one night, if you see what I mean. What about bed? Go on an early start and all that. I'll give you a good breakfast before you go." "Before we go, I suppose you mean," said Thorin. "Aren't you the burglar, and isn't sitting on the doorstep your job, not to speak of getting inside the door? But I agree about bed and breakfast. I'd like 6 eggs with my ham, when starting on a journey, fried, not poached, and mind you don't break 'em." After all the orders of their breakfast without so much as a please, they all got up. The Hobbit had to find room for all of them and filled their spare rooms and made beds on chairs and sofas before he got them stowed and went to his own little bed very tired and altogether not happy. One thing he did make his mind up about was not to bother to get up very early and cook everyone else's wretched breakfast. The tickishness was wearing off, and he was not now quite so sure he was going on any journey in the morning. As he lay in bed, he could hear Thorin still humming to himself in the best bedroom next to him. "For over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away ere break of day, to find our long forgotten gold." Bilbo went to sleep with that in his ears, and it gave him a very uncomfortable dreams. It was long after the break of day when he woke up. Chapter 2. Roast Mouton. Up jumped Bilbo, and putting on his dressing gown, went into the dining room. There he saw nobody, but all the signs of a large and hurried breakfast. There was a fearful mess in the room, and piles of unwashed crocks in the kitchen. Nearly every pot and pan he possessed seemed to have been used. The washing up was so dismally real that Bilbo was forced to believe the party of the night before he had been part of his bad dreams, as he had rather hoped. Indeed, he was really relieved after all to think that they had gone without him, and without bothering to wake him. And yet, in a way, he could not help feeling just a trifle of disappointment. The feeling surprised him. "Don't be a fool, Bilbo Baggins," he said to himself, "thinking of dragons and all that outlandish nonsense at your age." So he put on an apron, lit fires, boiled water, and washed up. Then he had a nice little breakfast in the kitchen before turning out in the dining room. By that time the sun was shining, and the front door was open, letting in a warm spring breeze. Bilbo began to whistle loudly and to forget about the night before. In fact, he was just sitting down to a nice little second breakfast in the dining room by the open window, when in walked Gandalf. "My dear fellow," said he, "whenever are you going to come? What about an early start? And here you are having breakfast, or whatever you call it, at 10:30. They left you the message because they could not wait." "What message?" said poor Bilbo Baggins in a fluster. "Great elephants," said Gandalf. "You're not at your owl yourself this morning. You've never dusted the mantelpiece." "What's that got to do with it?" "I've had enough to do with washing up for 14. If you had dusted the mantelpiece, you would have found this just under the clock," said Gandalf, handing Bilbo a note, written, of course, on his own notepaper. This is what he read. "Thorin and Company, to Bilbo Baggins greeting. For your hospitality, our sincerest thanks, and for your offer of professional assistance, our grateful acceptance. Terms: cash on delivery, up to and not exceeding 1/14 of total profits, if any. All traveling expenses guaranteed in any event. Funeral expenses to be defrayed by us or other representatives, if occasion arises and the matter is not otherwise arranged for. Thinking it unnecessary to disturb your esteemed repose, we have proceeded in advance to make requisite preparations, and shall await your respected person at the Green Dragon Inn, by water at 11 a.m. sharp. Trusting that you will be punctual, we have the honor to remain, yours deeply, Thorin and Company. That leaves you just 10 minutes. You'll have to run, said Gandalf. But, said Bilbo. No time for it, said the wizard. But, said Bilbo again, no time for that either. Off you go. To the end of his days, Bilbo could never remember how he found himself outside without a hat, a walking stick, or any money, or anything that he usually took when he went out, leaving a second breakfast, and half finished and quite unwashed up, pushed his keys into Gandalf's hands and running as fast as his furry feet could carry him down the lane, past the great mill, across the water, and then on for a mile or more. Very puffed he was when he got to the bywater, just on the stroke of 11, and found he had come without a pocket handkerchief. Bravo, said Balin, who was standing at the inn door looking out for him. Just then all the others came round the corner of the road from the village. They were on ponies, and each pony was slung about with a kind of baggages, packages, parcels, and paraphernalia. There was a very small pony, apparently for Bilbo. Up you two get, and off we go, said Thorin. I'm awfully sorry, said Bilbo, but I've come without my hat, and I've left my pocket handkerchief behind, and I haven't gotten any money. I didn't get your note until after 10:45, to be precise. Don't be precise, said Dwalin, and don't worry. You will have to manage without pocket handkerchiefs and have a good many other things before you get to the journey's end. As for a hat, I've got a spare hood and a cloak in my luggage. That's how they all came to start, jogging off from the inn one fine morning just before May, on ponies, and Bilbo was wearing a dark green hood and a dark green cloak borrowed from Dwalin. They were too large for him, and he looked rather comic. What his father Bilbo would have thought of him, I daren't think. His only comfort was he couldn't be mistaken for a dwarf, as he had no beard. They had not been riding very long, when up came Gandalf, very splendid on a white horse. He had brought a lot of pocket handkerchiefs and Bilbo's pipe and tobacco. So after that, the party went along very merrily, and they told stories or sang songs as they rode forward all day, except, of course, when they stopped for meals. These didn't come quite as often as Bilbo would have liked them, but still he had begun to feel that adventures were not so bad after all. At first they had passed through Hobbit lands, a white, respectable country, inhabited by decent folk with good roads, an inn or two, and now then a dwarf of a farmer ambling by one business. Then they came to lands where people spoke strangely and sang songs Bilbo had never heard of. Now they'd gone too far into the lone lands, where there were no people left, no inns, and the roads grew steadily worse. Not far ahead were dreary hills, rising higher and higher, dark with trees. On some of them were old castles with an evil look, as if they had built by wicked people. Everything seemed gloomy for the weather that day that had taken a nasty turn. Mostly it had been as good as May can be, even in merry tales, but now it was cold and wet. In the lone lands they had been obliged to camp when they could, but at least it had been dry. To think it'll soon be June, grumbled Gimbo, as he splashed along behind the others in a very muddly track. It was afternoon tea time. It was pouring with rain, and had been day. His hood was dripping into his eyes. His cloak was full of water. The pony was tired and stumbled on stones. The others were too grumpy to talk. I'm Sure the rain has got into the dry clothes and into the food bags, thought Bilbo. Bother burgling and everything to do with it. I wish I was home in my nice hole by the fire with the kettle just beginning to sing. It was not the last time he wished that. Still, the dwarves jogged on, never turning around or taking any notice of the hobbit. Somewhere behind the gray clouds and the sun must have gone down, for it began to get dark as they went down into a deep valley with a river at the bottom. Wind got up, and willows along its banks bent and sighed. Fortunately, the road went over an ancient stone bridge, for the river, swollen with the rains, came rushing down from the hills and mountains in the north. It was nearly night when they had crossed over. The wind broke up the gray clouds, and a wandering moon appeared above the hills between the flying rags. Then they stopped, and Thorin muttered something about supper. And where shall we get a dry patch to sleep on? Not until then did they notice that Gandalf was missing. So far he had come all the way with them, never saying if he was in the adventure or merely keeping them company for a while. He had eaten most, talked most, and laughed most, but now he simply was not there at all. Just when a wizard would have been most useful, too, groaned Dori and Nori. They decided in the end that they would have to camp where they were. They moved to a clump of trees, and though it was drier under them, the wind shook the rain off the leaves, and the drip was most annoying, and the mischief seemed to have gone into the fire. Dwarves could make a fire almost anywhere, out of almost anything, wind or no wind, but they could not do it that night, not even Oin and Gloin, who were especially good at it. Then one of the ponies took fright, and nothing, and bolted. He got into the river before they could catch him, and before they could get him out again, Philly and Killy nearly drowned, and all the baggage he carried was washed away off of him. Of course, it was mostly food, that there was mighty little left for supper, and less for breakfast. We'll stop there and return back for the campsite. Hope you enjoyed the cozy reading, soft, slow, cozy reading of The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. And we'll see you next time.